All right, teammates, we're back once again. If this is your first time listening to the Move Swiftly podcast, welcome to the show. Welcome to the number one show on innovative teamwork. Great to have you. Thank whoever brought you here. Thank however you got here. Just thank the person, thank whatever. Hit the 5-star review, all that. You are in for a treat as always. To my regular listeners, here we go again. Here we go again. Another gem, another person that's on this show that is going to be reaffirming the concept of leaving the victim mentality. That's going to be reaffirming the importance of education. That's going to be reaffirming the importance of developing your strength in your mindset, not necessarily strength physically, but also strength in your mindset as well. So Danny Almeida, he's a strength professor. I believe he's actually in the West Coast. It's at Cal Poly, correct?
Correct.
Cal Poly Alto. So is it Cal Poly?
Cal Poly San Luis Obispo.
Cal Poly St. Louis. All right. So no, wait, Cal Poly, what?
Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. There's
St.
three
Louis.
Cal Polys. There's
Oh,
three.
okay, yeah. California is huge, by the way. I thought you said St. Louis. I'm like, no, you're not in St. Louis. But yeah, like I was telling you actually before we started recording, me myself, I've been to a ton of different schools. I started out at the public school. I was recruited to go to a Catholic school that was predominantly Caucasian. The schools I was at before that was predominantly Black and Latino. Then I went to a small liberal arts college. Then I went to a community college while I worked, and then I went to a big public university. Then I went to an online school to finish it off, and then I coached at a ton of different schools. And your concept and your kind of your career and everything that you're about is about teaching strength to professors and kind of giving them their ability to show up as their authentic self as professors. And myself as an educator now, I teach at a brand new charter school in West Palm Beach. I'm just curious in how you were driven to go into that field, how you're driven to be that person that is educating in a different way, knowing how badly it needs, knowing how badly our young people need quality education. So I know this is a loaded question, but could you just sort of talk a little bit about your background and how you got started in the industry? And I know you have a really extensive resume, so the floor is kind of yours to go ahead.
Okay, well, I guess I'll start briefly with like just growing up and in college and start there, but
Yeah.
move more to my professional career. But I've always sort of been the minority in the room.
Yeah.
My hometown was pretty diverse in general, but the classes I was in starting in, pretty much late elementary school,
Hmm.
especially in middle school and high school, like being in like sort of advanced placement classes. I was one of a few minorities in the class and definitely the only Black boy that ever was in any of my classes. On top of it all,
I've been there too, though. Like in my high school,
yeah,
I was the only Black kid in several of my classes.
on top of it all, well, at the time was in the closet. I have come out since, but you
Oh my
know,
God. Oh, you're a Black. Oh my God. Yeah. So right. So that's difficult.
yeah, so I was teased and for being different,
Huh.
and I was different in a lot of ways. I also was like a musician. I wasn't an athlete, so in my hometown and even in my family, I'd say like being an athlete was something that was
Expected of us.
privileged. So all of those things. But I was the smart kid. I was the kid who all the adults were happy with. I did whatever I was told, but I also tried to fit in all the time. Like I tried to conform to what other people thought I should be.
Hmm.
Um, anyway, so then, I decided to go into education after giving up what my grandparents in particular wanted me to be a doctor, a MD doctor, my grandmother in particular. Went in a different direction, worked in higher education, in student affairs, and ultimately as a career counselor, where I was helping students and alumni figure out how they're going to figure out who they are and how they're going to apply that to what they want to do for a living. And that's where I discovered this Clifton Strengths Assessment. And that was about 15 years ago when I first took the Strengths Finder. And then I had a boss who ultimately, like, I had communication as a strength, one of my top strengths, which I never thought I did. I just thought I talked too much when I was
Right.
growing up. Or I'd be seen and not heard. And I was teased when I was giving presentations. So I was so afraid of speaking in public until
Now
I,
that's the. I don't mean to cut you off, but that's that tiny book the Clifton. I think I recently read that. It has like it's like a tiny book and it just goes over what the strengths are, right? So
Yeah,
you
there's
actually took
34.
30, that was it.
There's
Now you took the
34.
assessment, was it like something that you just did on your own? Because I remember just reading the book and it was kind of a leisure thing. Was it like part of a program you were on, or was it
It
a
was part of my, we used it in my office as one of the assessments we use with students. So it started with me learning it, for myself to be able to facilitate conversations with students. And I started doing workshops with students and staff on my campus at the time was Loyola Marymount University. And I just like took a really liking to it. I say I caught the strengths bug. And ever
I
since then,
got
it's
you. Yeah.
been part of my life. And then fast forward, I went back to school, got my PhD. I didn't write my dissertation about strengths at all, but I did some work with it there. But it was when I got to Cal Poly when I re-engaged with it. And I had already at that point done about 8 or 9 years of work on it. But it was like when you're in a new role,
Mhm.
as if like you don't know anything. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know
Right.
where you don't know where the bathroom is. You don't know how to do this. And you try to model yourself after people you admire. So I had a great faculty advisor, Bill, in my PhD program. And I was like, I'm gonna be just like Bill. He was successful. I respect him. Everybody respects him. I'm gonna basically conform myself to be like him. So
Mhm.
I tried that and it really didn't work because I wasn't using my strengths. I wasn't being myself.
Mhm.
Also, my version of the strengths, I call it culturally informed strength. So it's not only about what strengths you have, but also your social and cultural identities and how those impact or inform how you use the strengths or how other people receive you when you use the strengths. So I started to realize that I would be better off figuring out how to do it my own way than trying to do it somebody else's way. But we need support in doing that. So the program I have that I created for it's available to all STEM faculty in the California State University system, which is 23 campuses.
Mhm.
We got a National Science Foundation grant to create this program. We're in our fifth and final year of that. And it's we train tenured faculty to coach new faculty of color in those fields, the STEM fields, to be their authentic self. So they go through this year-long program where we have a retreat at the beginning of the year and we train the coaches and train the early career faculty on this model. And I've also, do it beyond higher education. I've done some Fortune 500 companies, some city governments,
Mhm.
etc. And now I'm actually in the process of transitioning out of my full-time role as a faculty member to do more facilitation of workshops and coaching individuals privately, other universities, other corporations, etc. But basically, the idea is like you have to believe that you can be your authentic self and be successful in that way, but also surround yourself with people, hopefully your supervisors and your colleagues, and everybody else is kind of on the same page with this so we can support one another to do it. Because it's really hard. Even, I had, like I said, I had 8 years of experience like training people, but there I was not doing it for myself. I had
Right.
a colleague who was also a strengths coach. He said, Danny, what strengths do you have that you're not using in the classroom when I was complaining about, how it was going? And it was like, oh my God, I asked that question all the time to other people, but I needed somebody external to me to
Mhm.
ask. And that's when I totally shifted everything and we developed this program and so on and so forth.
So, what are some examples like results that you have had when you were not showing up as your authentic self? When it comes to you
Yeah.
trying to, and I get what you're saying because there was a time, especially when I was coaching high school football. I was 26 years old, youngest coach on the staff, the whole thing. And there was a period where you don't want bad reviews or you're not really
Yeah.
feeling like you could yell at the players because you're so young, you're not that far removed in their age. But
Yeah.
eventually I started to develop and things like that. And it helped the players because they wanted to be coached. So what are some examples you may have of not showing up as your
Yeah.
authentic self and then becoming
So
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, in that first year, I'm on the tenure track and, even when you're not, you have course evaluations.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't good. They were
Mm-hmm.
not. I think people can tell when you're not being authentic and not being
And
yourself.
these were college age students, right?
These were graduate students, so they were,
Yeah.
age 22 to
They did
40s,
their bachelor's,
even
right, right.
40 or 50 years old. Most of them were in their early 20s though.
Mhm.
And you know, I didn't really like my job. They didn't quite like me or get me,
Mhm.
which I get now because I really wasn't being me. I was trying to be somebody else. Like Bill assigned the most reading, so I was like, I have to assign the most reading. He was very critical about writing, so I had to be very critical about writing.
Mhm.
And I still apparently assigned more reading than most, and I'm critical of writing, but I sort of started to lean into I have lots of relationship building strengths and also communication's my number one strength. So
Mhm.
like I sort of put on a performance, if you will, like in the front of the room. How I teach is very like animated, and I really wasn't even doing that.
Right.
And I wasn't developing relationships with students. Like their first interaction with me was getting like a paperback with like red ink all over it, you know?
Right.
Now I switched it up where I was like, okay, we're still gonna have papers and stuff, but first you're gonna have to come in groups first to talk to me about a project you're gonna work on, right? So
Right.
they could like build, so I could build rapport with them, and then
Mhm.
to the point where so that was when I wasn't being authentic.
Yeah.
Then once I changed it, I got promoted 2 years early to associate professor, which to my knowledge had never happened before.
Mhm.
Um, because I believe that I did it in a different way. I submitted this grant proposal, which nobody thought I would get right away because it's something that you usually get after tenure. But even the
Right.
way that I did that, I did it by building relationships first instead of writing an idea down. Like I
Mhm.
met with people and I got feedback and input and then tweaked my plan and then wrote it and got some feedback, and it was the highest scoring grant that the NSF this program got that year, and they were
Yeah.
so surprised.
That's on that. That's awesome.
But
Yeah.
I did it my way.
Yeah.
I did it in a different way than other people would. And so I actually, the grant itself was part of the reason I think I got promoted early.
Mhm.
But then that same year, in 2020, my students nominated me for Educator of the Year in the School of
Mhm.
Education, which I then got too. So I was like, I don't know if these things would have happened had I followed the path that I was on that first year, where I was trying to do it the way I thought, Bill did it, or the way that, other people had been successful. I did it in a different way, my
Yes,
own.
there's a common phrase that regular listeners are used to hearing on the show, but it's important that it gets re-emphasized as often as I can say it, especially when you're talking about education, coaching, and even fitness training, whatever it is you're doing to influence people. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Care.
All
Yeah.
right, because especially in our world, in the education world, you get a lot of people that have written a lot of books. They got a lot of knowledge, and telling them how to do something becomes a challenge in itself. Telling them, especially as someone who is looking at it from the minority standpoint and you're willing to learn, but then developing that belief in yourself to say, hold up, I'm going to do it my way. I get where you're coming from, but I'm going to do it my way. Sometimes a lot of these people get offended and it becomes hard to actually grow because it's like, look, we're paying you, you get your money, you get your salary, keep it moving. But when it comes to you developing, I guess your kind of your inner ability to speak to authority in a, I don't want to say disrespectful way, but in a way where you're like, look, I'm going to do things my way, because I'm sure it wasn't received. I mean, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but was it met with any resistance when you were the first guy to get promoted? Was there any resistance?
Well,
But it was like you got the grant, like this guy that is not like seasoned in this game, but he was able to do these things. I can sort of see other people look at him like, who we think he is and stuff like that. So speak on that.
yeah. Yeah, I was lucky that I did have a lot of support,
Right.
particularly my department chair at the time was supportive of me doing all of these things.
That's excellent.
It's not only his decision. So when you're getting promoted or you get tenure, it goes through a peer committee. So people that are on yours, well, that are, a little bit ahead of you, right? Then it
Okay.
goes to your department chair, then it goes to the college level committee, then it goes to the dean, then it goes to the provost.
Mm-hmm.
And along that path, it wasn't a yes on every now because I was going up 2 years early. By the way, I never said like, oh, let me go up 2 years early.
It was never your intent,
Never
right?
do that. My
Mhm.
department chair and others were like, you should try to go up early.
Oh,
Like,
okay, good,
you
good.
know,
So there was
um,
proper
so
support.
I had allies and these, I realized, the other thing is interesting about all these committees that were voting on me, to
Mhm.
my knowledge, except one committee, I'm not quite sure, but I'm pretty sure they were all white too. Every step of the way, it was a white person. And then the last person
Mhm.
who had said, like, yes, you're promoted or you have tenure, actually, well, once I got tenure, actually, was a Black woman. It just sort of like she had just been hired, so she hadn't been there the whole time. But it was interesting. Like everybody else, though, I'm pretty sure was all white along the way,
Right.
and a lot of white allies, within those groups for sure. But there were people who I did meet resistance on a couple of those levels of review that,
Mhm.
especially the 2 years early. But I've since heard, that whole experience has changed some of their perspectives on like what counts or how people can be successful in this role.
Mhm.
So they were going by what the system sort of like socialized them to
Right.
believe. I didn't have maybe as many um peer-reviewed publications, even though I brought in $2.7 million of which ended up being over $3 million when we got supplemental funding,
Hmm.
which was the most second most of anybody that year, I believe.
Right.
So um, you know, and that counted for something too. Especially now, I mean, now that was at the beginning, right? But after 5 years of it, the feedback that we've gotten from the participants and from the NSF that's funded us has been like overwhelmingly positive and reassuring that like, we're doing something important and good, and it
I,
was
I
worth it.
think that's so powerful what you just said because there's so many people, so many us as blacks that are in the race baiting business, okay, are in a situation that you might have saw these white people and okay, I didn't get this promotion because this one was white or that one was black and all that. You didn't do that. All right, you speak very highly of people of all ethnicities. You speak very highly of all the allies and everything. That is so important for us as people of, especially people of color, to hear, so we're not looking at maybe a situation where you're by yourself or you may be the only, again, I've been the only black person in class in a school, and you're not looking at it as a burden, but you're now looking at it as a blessing. And I want to re-emphasize what you said because it's important that you understand it's about who was qualified. Had nothing to do with race, had nothing to do with anything that you may like. That's your personal business. It was about who was the best qualified, who brought in the grant, and who was actually the person good enough for the position. That's what we got to do. That's what we got to get back to. We got to get away from this whole concept where, and don't get me wrong, again, race plays a role. And I have I'm the only black guy at the school I teach, aside from, I'm actually the only black male teacher, right? But there's also another black guy in the school, and I'm always going back and forth with him, but I get that there may be some barriers, but I don't want to walk around with the victim mentality.
Yeah.
I don't want that energy to project on our kids. I don't want that energy to project on our students to where they start feeling like I could use the fact that I'm black as an excuse not to put in their work. So even though it may be there, let's not acknowledge it. Let's keep it moving. So kind of speak to that a little bit because I know I've heard you on previous shows about talk about how I think it was your dad that's a police officer and some of the things you were going through back
Yeah.
when 2020 and things like that. So kind of give you an open
Well,
stick around with that.
yeah, I mean, I think so. I came up, I was in college when affirmative action was like at the time a hot button. I mean, it still
Hot
is.
button issue, right? Yeah.
And I, came from, a place of like, I never wanted that to be the reason that people accepted me into a
Exactly.
college or gave me anything. And I remember like, the first time it really came up was like, I remember I was in my calculus class, and we all got our acceptances or rejections from universities, and I got into Stanford.
Right.
Um, and this, white kid in my class who had always been, somebody that was really nice to me actually among the people who were not,
Mm-hmm.
did not get in, right? And he actually wasn't the one, I don't think, that was saying this stuff, but like other people were like, that's when it started to be like, well, Danny just got in
Right. Right.
because of this. But I was like, well, I actually had higher SATs than you. Like I get better grades than you.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all had our we all knew our rankings. I was like ranked in the top 10 and he was not. I played multiple instruments. I was in every musical, group there was on instrumental group on the only person who was, by the way, in the whole
Mm-hmm.
school and that played and everything. So I had all these other things going for me, but I internalized a lot of that, where I was never sure like my capabilities because people always questioned if I was getting this because, of the
Mm-hmm.
color of my skin. So I rejected affirmative action, to be honest, at that point. I don't anymore. Like I understand now more after my life and my education and learning from, what's gone on in this world, that we do need things like affirmative action. It's about when there's a tie, then you'd say, well, let's give the chance to someone who's always historically been excluded, not like let's give an unqualified person a spot.
Yeah,
Um,
well, I don't mean to cut you off there, but I had my reservations about it as well. I really do. I have my reservations about it, and it's probably because of the way it is communicated, the way
exactly.
that the message gets out from the national media, and everything to sell ads, to sell tickets, to sell what they do. They got to put a message out in an adversarial way, in a contentious way. They're not going to
Yeah.
put the message out the way you put the message out, where it's this, and then guess what? Even if you don't get into school, there's a community college. You do what you got to do at a community college, and you can get into whatever school you want.
Yeah.
All the problems get solved.
Yeah.
I was that person that went again to a JUCO after I told Maceo and got into the school I want off grades. But that doesn't get communicated with the national media. Everything is affirmative action. It's going to kick this one out and this one out, and then there you go. So,
Yeah.
anyway,
And
go ahead.
the
Really
one
gonna keep
time
me on
where
my tangent.
the one time where I was, was the grant where it's a
Mhm.
blind review where they just are reviewing proposals and not knowing who submitted it. And we scored the highest of any other group that year. And I remember when I got the call from the program, he was like, I was so surprised because usually it's somebody that's their second or third time trying to get this grant that gets the
Mhm.
highest score, but it was us. And I was the lead of all these other faculty that put this grant. I wrote most of it myself, though I had a lot of help and a lot of feedback along the way. I don't want to take full credit, but the idea and most of the writing was me. So that was where I was like, wow, like, okay, I can rest on the fact that this was not because of the color of my skin.
Mhm.
Um, that I got this, was probably like in my world, in our world, higher education, like a National Science Foundation grant is sort of like the creme de la creme of grants.
So
To,
when you were again, I teach at a school brand new. All right, there for 30 years they were a just an after school program, and now we just became a school maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And a large part of the school, the survival of the school, is our ability to get grants. So there was a while there where I was possibly going to be a grant writer, and I like it, I guess, sort of. It was something I could do because I enjoy writing. So it was just something to do. And that kind of brings me to another question that I have for you is what was it about your grant that hit so well, that did so well? Is this something that you were doing regularly as grant writing, or was this something that you wrote this one, they loved it, and it hit it like I was very confused about what to do as a grant writer because as a writer in general, I just, write.
yeah. Um, I think it was this this approach, this culturally informed strengths approach.
Uh-huh.
I think that really
Got
resonated
it.
with the NSF. It was an asset-based approach, like looking at what's right with people instead of what's wrong. Like how do we build from what's right? That now, I talk a lot about that we all have shadow sides of all these strengths. Like I can talk too much. You know what I mean? Like there are times when that's the case, and like, but how do I manage that and not give up on the communication strength that I have? And how do I leverage the other strengths that I have? How do I leverage my teammates to do things? The best was like, so I have a team of grants, of people on this grant, right?
Right.
By the way, writing is not my favorite thing. I don't want to write any more than I have to. I want to speak. I want
Crazy.
to facilitate. So
Wow.
we just presented at the National Conference of Race and Ethnicity, and I had a team of people, and I was like, I get so stressed out about deadlines to write proposals in the midst of teaching and all the other stuff that we're doing. But I
Okay.
had a team of people, and they wrote the proposals for me, and we all were up at the front of the room, but they kept on handing the microphone to me
Mhm.
mostly. And I had 5 presentations during this conference in Honolulu um in a month ago, and I didn't have to write any of the proposals. It was beautiful. Like they have an interest in that. I had an interest in doing that. So it's like
That
and we got really great feedback on these things, and it was a great partnership. And it was when I finally realized like I don't have to be good at everything. I don't even if I'm good at everything, I don't have to do everything that I want
yeah.
to do. I can find other people who like to do that or want to do that, might be better at it in certain ways than I
Mhm.
am. So I think part of why this was such a good proposal was because like I could write other things, I'm sure. My dissertation also, I got dissertation of the year, so obviously I must have
Mhm.
been able to write that too.
Right,
But like when I have my heart and soul in something, like it was like this is my baby. Like this is like I've been talking about this, living and breathing this strengths approach, particularly
right.
the culture informed strengths approach. That if I'm writing about that, then that's a whole nother story. So anyway, I guess I don't know. I'd have to go back and see if I could get like actually how we scored on each piece because there's a lot of pieces to the grant proposal
Right.
that I'm not sure like what we scored higher on or lower on, but all I know is that it was the highest scored
Right.
overall.
And and I do want to be very respectful of your time because you did mention something earlier about you transitioning the work that you're doing to now serve businesses and workshops and things like that. So
Yeah.
feel free to kind of go ahead and talk a little bit about that, about what's
Yeah, so I've ever since 2015, I've had Strengths Deep Dive LLC, where I sort of had, a side gig that I would, here and there do workshops, coach people individually.
Mhm.
In the last few years, a couple of times over the last 10 years or so, I had thought about leaving my job. Actually, before we got the grant, I had planned to leave. And then we got the grant, and I was like, oh my God, I was sort of not happy when we got the grant because I was like, I gotta stay,
Yeah.
so I stayed, and then now the grant's in its final year, and I'm like, okay, this is the time now for me to go. I have the opportunity to work half time next year to try this out and then
Okay.
see, and then I have the opportunity to come back full time after that or
Mhm.
leave. But my hope is that things go well enough that I'm confident enough to go out on my own. I have some other things in the hopper. I have some other subcontracts with like another strengths organization I'm going to work with, and like also, some other faculty development programs that have a year-long program, and other people who are submitting grants that are like, I don't have to be the one writing it. I don't have to be the one leading it. That's the other thing I realized. I don't necessarily need to be the leader of this grant. You can
Right.
write me in to come do the workshops because I was doing all the workshops plus leading the team.
Right.
So I'm there. A lot of them are writing grants, people that were part of my program and others that are going to hire me to do the coaching or train coaches or do workshops, which is that's really what I want to spend my time doing. So, and then also coaching people individually. So I just relaunched my website, which is thestrengthsprofessor.com.
Mhm.
And then, as you know, we just started the podcast, which is through the grant. But my hope is that that takes off as well, and that I might have a spin-off pod because we're just interviewing now just people that are part of the grant. But I
Right.
would interview just anybody about strengths, to be honest. My goal eventually is to have like Oprah and Barack Obama and Beyonce and everybody else that have taken the strengths because I think I know what their strengths are, by the way. And
Mhm.
part of my workshops, I'm going to like talk about like Beyonce, for instance, and like what strengths we think she has, right? And
Mhm.
then say, like, well, if she were a white man, do you think she would have? Because if you watch her movie, for her concert, you can see that she, you know, has so much pushback on some things. I'm like, I can't believe Beyonce still gets pushback on like the
Mhm.
light or whatever, from mostly, men in the room, white
You
men
see how
too.
great, but you see how great her shows are, but she has such a strong team around her.
Exactly,
You know what
exactly.
I'm
But it's her
saying?
vision. It's her vision, and I think my point of bringing her up is that like because she's a woman of color, she still experiences
Hmm.
resistance that I don't think she would experience if she were a white man or even maybe even a white woman.
Hmm.
There's a couple moments that in the movie that I want to do clips of and be like, let's look at this and talk about how that's a barrier to her using these strengths that she has.
Hmm.
It's also an opportunity. Your identities are an opportunity to develop your strengths in ways that you wouldn't have otherwise. But we need to acknowledge both sides of it.
Yeah.
This is like a way of like acknowledging like the injustices that we have, but then finding strengths-based ways of navigating those systems and also like working to dismantle those things too, with the help of allies and supporters too.
I'll tell you what, man, I'm gonna have to go back and reread that book because it was a book that was gifted to me, and because it was such a short read, I guess I didn't do the test. I didn't really participate and play
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
as much as I should have. But I'm talking to you.
Yeah, definitely. Because
Go
there's
back
a
and read
code in the back
it.
of the book. There's going to be an access code
Yeah,
for
I
you to
saw that. Yeah.
assessment. Now, the thing that makes me unique is this culturally informed piece, though, because
Huh?
my goal is to also like train all the other strengths coaches because that's what we did in the grant. We trained
Mhm.
people went to the Gallup training and took the training I took, but now we then train them on some of this culturally informed part so they can be culturally informed strengths coaches. So they're not just able to say, most strengths coaches say, oh yeah, it doesn't matter what your race or your gender is. If
Right.
you have command's one of the strengths, right? I just recorded the episode of command today.
Right.
So it's coming out soon. But a black man with command is often seen as intimidating and threatening. So is a black woman. She's sort of the angry black woman. A white woman probably is called a bitch sometimes. The
Mhm.
white man is like a natural born leader,
Right.
probably with command. Command's like taking control and being very direct. And
Hmm.
it's like that's usually my easiest one to portray this difference, like this difference in race and gender. Like they all have the same strength, but they're going to have different experiences using that strength.
Right.
And then the context you're in, it's about strengths,
Uh-huh.
identity, and context. So
Right.
like I could be the same man with the same strengths, but if I am trying to use them at a different institution, like I work at Cal Poly, which is a predominantly white institution in San Luis Obispo, but if I were working in Cal State LA,
Hmm.
where it's like majority minority, like I would navigate that differently with the same strengths and same
I
identity.
got you.
So we have to look at all three. So it's sort of like this three-part.
That makes a lot of sense. I never thought about. So you would actually take the book, and when you say culturally, when you say what was the term again? Culturally, that
Culturally informed.
informed, right? So they would be able to kind of language it in a person's culture, but it's the same actual strength, so it's understood. No.
Yeah, well, I say like you can still read the same book and the same strength, but then you're going to like as an individual
Hmm.
be able to make connections through the exercises and conversations I facilitate
Right.
that help you make connections to how I operationalize this strength, how other people react to me, you
Yeah.
know,
To the
is not
subconscious,
only the
right?
strength. It's not only the strength and it's not only the identity.
Hmm.
Sometimes like my experience as a black man in higher, I was just interviewing these two people with command, right? Two black faculty with command.
Hmm.
Command's low on my list. It's like number 28 or out of 34 or something like that. They
Hmm.
have it number two and the way that they're talking, the way that they're experiencing being black in higher education is so different than me. But at the same time, I realized like I was also called intimidating. I'm like, when I was new, and I'm like, oh my God, like, but not quite as intimidating as them, I'm sure. But like it was used. People I had heard that through the grapevine that I was intimidated, and I had never been that's never been said about me in my
Hmm.
whole life up until that point. So it's like when you have power and you have a black identity or any other minoritized identity, people don't know how to deal with that. And
Right.
so anyway, it's an endless like conversation because I feel like I talk about onion layer peel back. It's like
Right.
you're just starting to peel back these layers, and I'm literally doing it like every day. And
Mm.
what my goal is to help other people do the same so they can understand themselves more fully and then bring that to their roles, whether that's being a parent, whether
Mm.
that's being a friend or a partner, a professor, a business person,
Right.
anybody really could benefit from this. And the thing is, like, we have to understand it so we can support other people to do the same. And I think we'll just have a better world in that way.
Now, is this something that translates to HBCUs as well, or how do you pick the college now that you're talking about making sure things are contextualized in a cultural standpoint?
Yeah, that would be, it does, because, how you navigate that space. Now, race might not be the primary difference, obviously, at an
Mhm.
HBCU, but all of these other social identities, if you're Muslim versus Christian, if you're, gay, LGBTQIA plus versus straight, like,
Mhm.
so all the other social identities play in and actually could be discussed. Like we're gonna do a workshop soon this year with just Black faculty, staff, and students at Cal Poly to talk
Mhm.
about the Black experience at Cal Poly, but how we all navigate it differently and experience it a little bit differently, even though some of it might be the same. But you
Right.
could do the same thing at an HBCU or any other institution. It just
Mhm.
that would be really cool to do actually. Like I hope I can get a client someday
Right.
HBCU because I think there's also colorism, the darker people versus the lighter people, what I mean,
There's a
all these other differences that I think, play into how people experience their life
Mhm.
um, and experience their world. And the strengths are part of that too.
Right.
Somebody that has a completely opposite strengths than me, like number 34 is their number one, and my number one's their 34. And they're
Right.
gonna see the world differently than me. And even if they have a lot of other similarities in terms of race and other
Right.
ideologies.
You actually beat me to my next question. Is there an ideal client? Is there an ideal person that you would love to work with, or is it just pretty much people that want to develop, professionally develop and things like that?
You know, I've been told as recently as today, like I need to hone in on like what my
An
ideal
ideal.
client is. And I sometimes struggle with that because I do think that everybody could benefit from this. I
Hmm.
think I'm starting off like focused on higher education, but I've had several really high profile clients in terms of like the businesses and like Fortune 500 companies where it's like been really successful too. So
Yeah.
I think because of my background being in higher education, that's where I'm mostly valued. But you know, I did this, you know, C-level suite of like some Fortune 500 companies just this last year. So
Hmm.
I don't want to limit to that. And also city governments and stuff like that. I think it resonated a lot with. I did the city of Santa Barbara. I did all of their department heads
Hmm.
and their HR department. And I got the most wonderful testimonial that I just put on my website
Hmm.
from from there. So I guess, you know, all I have to say is anybody that is interested in, I think when you're new in a position
All right.
or you're supporting people who are new in a position, this is the most relevant because that's when you're not sure how to do it. So you need to figure out your own way and not just copying other people. But I
Hmm.
think someone could be mid-career in their career and like still benefit. But like I think if I were to try to distill it, I would say people who are new and then people who are managing or supporting people who are new.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And just real quick, how can people get in touch with you if they're interested in hearing more? What's the best way?
Um, I'd say LinkedIn is a great way. My email address is Almeida at strengthsdeepdive.com. As I mentioned, my website is probably the easiest to remember, thestrengthsprofessor.com. And they can find ways of getting in touch with me there and a link to my podcast there and a link to, you know, descriptions of some of the workshops that I do.
Sounds good. And all that'll be included in the show notes as well. So, Danny, this has been absolutely amazing. Very, very informative for me as an educator. I'm definitely going to go back and look at that. I mean, I read it and now I almost want to go grab it and make sure I'm getting the most out of the book.
Yeah,
So,
let me know when you take it.
I
I'd be curious to know what your strengths are too. 'Cause
got
I
you.
wonder if podcasters have like
Yeah, and like
similar
the code
strengths
is
or not.
in the back of every book. That's the cool part about it.
Yeah.
The code's in at the part of the back of every book. So, with all that, the way I close out all the shows, Danny, is I want you to use your imagination a little bit. Pretend that you're back. I believe it was like middle school, elementary school. Pretend that that young Danny is by himself in a classroom, by himself, just only the only one who looks like him. Pretend that that young man has clicked into the Zoom room. Give him some words of encouragement about how things will be, and we'll officially close with that.
Wow. Wow, that was emotional just to think about. I would just encourage him to not listen to the masses and not listen to what other people say. Listen to the people who are pumping you up, you know, the people in your life that are supporting you. But all those bullies or naysayers, which thankfully now I don't hear too much of, thankfully, but then I heard a lot of it and it really hurt and it delayed me in a lot of things in life. Delayed me coming out of the closet, delayed me becoming a public speaker, and coming into my own. But it didn't stop me fully, right? I overcame it because of all those other people in my life, I believe. And because of this tool, I really think the strengths assessment and then having my supervisor, Yas. So anyway, listen to the people who are supporting you and don't listen to the people who are not.
Absolutely, man. The support is so, so important for our young people. I deal with a group of kids every day that they they've been kind of shunned away from their public school system and they come to us and we do what we can to just sort of show them that they matter. And you hit the nail on the head. Show them that you care. The support is so very important, showing them their strengths every single day, and they will be some. They will make something out of their life. So keep doing what you're doing, brother, man. We just keep. I'm keeping. I'm going to be keeping up with your journey. I'll definitely get in touch with you when I retake the test and all that good stuff. Everyone out there, fellow teammates, continue to move swiftly. We will talk more soon.